Hi, everyone. Thanks for showing up at noon today. I'm Debbie Schwartz, founder of Dartmouth College. I'm here today with Becky Sabky. She's the author of Valedictorians at the Gate. Let me just do 2 minutes of housekeeping so I can make sure everybody is settled here and people who come on later can also get in. And lastly, I am going to stream this to Facebook so that anybody who is doing social media in the middle of the day can also watch. So let me make sure that goes. Oops, sorry, hold on. One more thing. Okay, so actually, while I am doing this, I'm having a little bit of problems. Why don't people put into chat where they're watching from and what year their student is in high school. What we're going to talk about today, applies to if you have a rising senior, a rising junior, but it would be great to hear where people are from. And let me just see if I can try this one more time. Okay. Sorry, Becky, we can't stream this to Facebook right now, but we'll get it up there after. And we got a really nice audience here right now. Okay, and I'm going to highlight you, Becky, so everyone can see you as you talk, and I'll spotlight you. That's the word. And I'll spotlight myself. Okay, great. Wow. People from all over, Austin, Chesapeake, Atlanta. I really do appreciate you coming in the middle of the day because we try and do these at night, but we're mixing it up. And to be honest, we also want to rest a little bit at night as well. So, okay. So, Becky, let's get started. I'm just going to read a tiny introduction for you. And then if you want to share a little bit about your background, and then we'll just start talking about college admissions and the book and everything you want to share with people. So Becky is a former director of international admissions at Dartmouth College. She's a graduate of Colby College and received her Master of Arts in Liberal Studies degree from Dartmouth. She's based in Vermont, and she's also an award-winning monthly newspaper columnist, a blogger, and an author of children's books. So that's great to hear. And Becky, and I so apologize, I meant to pull up your article. You had, honestly, a great article that went viral from the New York Times. It was an opinion piece, right? About a letter of recommendation.
Yeah. So first of all, Debbie, thank you. I love Road to College, and thank you all for joining us. I'm thrilled to do something at lunchtime in Vermont because my kids are with the babysitter, and it's nice to talk to families who are excited about college. So thank you all for being here. And yeah, I'll start by to just talk about that article. So I was a admissions officer at St. Lawrence University in upstate New York for 2 years. And then I worked in the Dartmouth admissions office for 13 years, working my way up to one of the directors. And I left in the spring, I think, of 2017 when I became pregnant with my first child. And at the time, I don't know if it was the mother hormones rushing through me or what, but I felt like I wanted to say something about my admissions career that I would remember when I became a parent. And so, long story short, I penned this New York Times op-ed. It was called "Check This Box If You're a Good Person."
I just actually found it. I put the link in.
I think it was April 2017, maybe. But what it was about was it was about the most memorable recommendation letter I had ever read in a college application.
Becky, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. So somebody said that the sound is not great. Two things. We actually were playing with this earlier. If you on your end can increase your volume, and then let me know if it improves, if you can hear Becky a little better. Okay, so somebody else said that sound is fine for them. So sorry.
Okay, how is that? That's as high as I can go.
How is that for people out there?
Is that better?
Yes, they said much better.
Great. I'll also lean in. You can see my anyway, so I wrote this op-ed. It was about the most memorable recommendation letter I ever read. And that recommendation letter was from a janitor at a particular high school. And what that janitor said was that the particular student that was applying to Dartmouth was the most impressive young person he had ever met, because he was the only young person to ever bother to learn that janitor's name in the janitor's career. And I wrote this op-ed basically just to make a statement out there that, I've read recommendation letters from senators, from celebrities, from, Olympians. And yet, as a group, reading that letter from a janitor, spoke to the students' kindness and intangible qualities. And long story short, I wrote the op-ed, it went viral. And the next thing you know, I had publishers coming to me saying, can you write a book? And so I did. It took me a couple of years. I had, 2 kids. I was home. Again, hormones running through me, but I wrote Valedictorians at the Gate. And the purpose of the book was, number one, to kind of, continue the themes that were in the op-ed of being a good person is more important than getting into a great school. Because as someone who got denied from Dartmouth myself when I applied as a high school student, I was pretty humble working in the Dartmouth admissions office, knowing that I had received the denial letter and now I was the one making the decisions. But also, I wanted to help students who were going to go through this process put forward their most authentic and thorough applications. So I wanted to give prescriptive advice that would help everyone, with the essays, with the resumes, like how to do this in a way that makes a student feel good about their college application moving forward, but also to have the takeaway that as long as you, put forward an authentic and thorough application, at the end of the day, whether or not you get into Harvard is not commentary on whether you're smart enough, good enough, kind enough, athletic enough, involved enough. It's a business. And so that op-ed kind of started this all and led to the book.
I think it's perfectly said. I actually love the word that you just used, prescriptive advice, because it truly is. And actually, again, before I go too far, just so people know, we're giving away, well, first of all, Becky's book came out last summer, right? This is the hard copy, but the soft copy, right, is coming out. Did it come out? Did it just come out?
Paperback.
Paperback.
It came out last week, maybe the week before. Yeah.
Okay, and we're giving away 10 of them. So, but the way that we can give them away is, and a lot of people already commented, just throw a comment in here, and then we know that you're here, you said something, and we're going to pick 10 people and notify you afterwards from the people who commented. So thanks. Now people are going to comment, but that's great. But the other thing I wanted to say, maybe you can talk a little bit about it when you said prescriptive, is like, who is this book really for? It says the title is Valedictorians at the Gate, but is it only for, students who want to apply to elite colleges?
The book is for high school Becky. I wrote this book so let me back up. So I went to public school in New Jersey. I had parents who were college educated. So we, from there, we knew how to tour colleges. We knew that I was likely going to colleges. We had lots of conversation about the financial aid and loans that we'd need. But I still felt it was a lot of pressure, even in 1997 as a high school senior. And I remember I started the book talking about how I was sure I was going to go to Dartmouth. I mean, I was president of National Honor Society. I played 4 years of soccer. Like, I was checking all the boxes as a public school, Jersey kid. And when I didn't get into Dartmouth, I was crushed. And I thought that there was something wrong with me. And then I was admitted to these other fabulous schools. I ended up going to Colby College in Maine, which I loved. I adored it. And it all ended up okay. And so I feel, again, when I left admissions after working there for so long, after making these impossible decisions, after seeing the business of admission, after working at a place with a 10% admit rate, now I think they're at about 6%.
I was going to say that 10, they're at 6.
Only a couple of years ago, before these pandemic applications just went. So I wrote the book for myself because I want to help kids out there, again, get good advice. Here are essay topics that are good, here are essay topics that aren't good, but also to recognize that, this is out of your control. And what is in your control is how you prepare for college, right? High school for the sake of high school, becoming a lifelong learner for the sake of lifelong learning. And that's going to carry you whether you decide not to go to college, whether you take a gap year, whether you end up at the University of Scranton, whether you end up at the University of Vermont, whether you end up at Dartmouth. So that was my intended audience.
Which is perfect, which honestly is everybody who, all students and all families, regardless of your resources, regardless of what your goals are, they will get tremendous value out of what you have to share, and, out of like the details of how you go through, the admissions process in the book and what admissions officers are looking for. So you, of course, already mentioned like some topics that I want to dig into, but one of the things I love about what you focus on in the book is that you're not afraid to describe college admissions and colleges as businesses. And I don't think enough families and students kind of sit back and understand that. And so maybe if you could give a little bit more detail about, well, why you focused on that, kind of saying that several times in the book, and also, what your perspective is about how they do operate as a business and what families should understand about the business of college.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to back up, so when I went to Colby, I became a tour guide, and I loved taking families around and talking about college, and in that way helping families. I'm excited about college. I'm a college kind of kid. I like it, right? And so when I went to work at St. Lawrence was great. I loved working there. Their admit rate was much higher than Dartmouth's was, and yet those decisions were still very difficult to make. St. Lawrence was a business, right? We had to decide. They had different types of financial aid scholarships. We had to decide who was getting the merit scholarships and who wasn't, right? We had, there was the business, like any college, of the athletics recruiting, right? Legacy that happens at some schools. That's a changing topic right now. We can talk about that later. The financial aid piece, of course, the international piece. I mean, it was a business. And when I left St. Lawrence and came to Dartmouth with an even tinier admit rate, it just magnified how much kind of behind the scenes working on goes to have a college, keep the lights on. And so when I say it's a business, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just hear so many people say admissions is an art or admissions is a science. And from where I sat, there were cycles. There was the recruiting cycle when admissions officers go out and they come to Dartmouth, right? They travel. I traveled the world. I was international. I went to Swaziland, right? I went to Singapore, and I was out there saying, come to Dartmouth, come to Dartmouth, come to Dartmouth. Then the next cycle is all those people apply, and you read the applications. And then the next cycle is, of those students we apply, we want to get them to come to us, right? So if the kid from Swaziland has an offer at Dartmouth and Babson, we're out there, smiling, bringing them to campus for the yield event. And then the summer is working on the recruitment of the next year. Like, where are we going to travel? Find those juniors. And so that was a business in and of itself. And so from the selectivity part, I mean, when you have a 10% admit rate for a group of students, when I worked there, about 20,000 applicants, there aren't a lot of quote unquote easy decisions, right? Because it's a self-selecting pool. Right. Students aren't applying to Dartmouth if they have C averages. It just doesn't happen, right? So we're getting students who already have self-selected themselves into this pool. And so when you have to make the decision, it very much became this kind of, we have to create a class out of the students that are here. And there was no kind of scientific algorithm we were using. And it wasn't really an art either. It was more of, who do we have? Who do we need? How do we create a class that's dynamic within the pool of who was already in that class?
But I mean, and maybe this is a little less a factor at Dartmouth, but there is just the numbers, just the revenue numbers related to admission. I mean, right? I mean, you have to bring in, or you try and bring in a certain amount of enrollment revenue, and you're also managing how much aid you give out. I mean, again, maybe it's a little different at Dartmouth versus other schools, but the schools are managing how much financial aid they're giving out and how much merit scholarships they're giving out. I mean, and basically then looking at what the net tuition revenue is.
Right. And, when I say business, a lot of people will come to me and they'll say, okay, if I am a oboe player, will I have a better chance of getting in if it is some sort of who do you need in the class? And every year I would say to them, I don't know who we need in the class until I start reading the applications. And this is a good exercise, I think, for people to understand and to help them when thinking about applying. I used to be in charge of hiring new admissions officers. And our exercise at the time, I don't think they do it anymore, was that we would give each person who wanted to work in admissions 3 sample fake applications, right? We, have Harry Potter and, whoever and whoever. And we would give them these 3 applications and we would give them 30 minutes. And we would say, read these 3 applications and choose one that you think we should admit to the class. And as an exercise, what we were looking for in someone who wanted to be an employee was just the way that they would present it to us, what was important to them. And these candidates, we would give them, very different candidates, and there was no right answer. And we would just look for what's important to you? Are recommendations important to you? How do you read these? The truth is that was a terrible exercise because 1 in 3 working at Dartmouth was a much higher percentage rate than
actuality.
Absolutely. And so when I would read applications, I was allowed 1 in 10. And that's really hard. And so what would happen is I felt often like a lawyer. And what I mean by that is that I'd have applications from students I've never met before, and I was collecting evidence from them in their applications, right? I needed them to help me to make the case to my dean that this one was going to create some sort of impact in the class that was different than the other 9. So I wasn't necessarily looking for an oboe player. I wasn't necessarily looking for a student of any particular background. I wasn't necessarily looking for a kid who, had quote unquote the strongest essay in my eyes. Instead, what I was looking for is which one of these 10 is going to give me enough evidence so I can make the case, just like a lawyer, to my dean that here is someone that has X, Y, or Z that's going to impact the class in a way that's going to enhance the class before. Because again, this is a business. And so we have a profile, right? We have this many students of color. We have this many male students, this many female students, this many students that are, coming from these geographic areas, this many students on financial aid. All of that stuff is out of your control.
Becky, sorry. Lean in a little bit more to your mic.
That stuff's out of your control. When I was applying to college, it was out of control, who I was, where I was applying from. Like, right. I am who I am. And so as an application reader, what is in your control is how you tell your lawyer,
right.
Present your evidence and say, hey, here's everything I'm doing. Here are all of my strengths. Here is why I can create impact in this class. Then what admissions counselors do is they read through, they find these, students that stand out for whatever reason. Then they put them in the class. And as the year goes on, they keep watching the numbers. And so if they say, wow, we have way too many females, right? Some females kind of move the opposite direction. To be honest and truthful, when that was happening, we weren't really, there wasn't a lot of change that needed to be made. Like I read New Jersey, I read the whole state of New Jersey. And what would happen is as you read many more applications, many more than those 3 that the employees were reading just during their job interview, when you read 3, when you read 10, when you read 100, when you read 1,000, you'll start to see who bubbles up. And so we didn't have to really do a lot of molding or modeling of the class at the end. But what we needed these people to kind of bubble up from the others. And it's an impossible thing to describe. It's just, as a student who's applying, the only things that are in your control is how much evidence you're giving your admissions officer. And from there, I would say, do what's in your control, wash your hands of it, know that it's a business. They might need you, they might not need you. But regardless, your most honest, authentic, thoughtful application is going to be your best bet.
So related to this, and we'll move on in a little bit, but this idea of it being a business, and somebody actually asked the question too, and I have the question. You always hear a lot about a college's priorities, the institutional priorities, right. So where does that kind of fall into? I assume institutional priorities maybe the head of admissions is involved with that, but that's probably kind of decided outside the admissions office. Is that where does that factor into the students who you are looking for in crafting that class?
Absolutely. So of course there are institutional priorities, right? For example, my hats that I wore when I worked at Dartmouth, I was the director of international. So I oversaw all of the international applicants. And I also was the head of the athletic recruiting liaison program. So I worked with all of the coaches. And those are two priorities, right? And they are different buckets, to be honest. I mean, the athletic recruiting process has a very specific process. There are different timelines. That's a different bucket. International, simply because of financial aid, because at the time we kind of went back and forth between need blind and need based, we had to keep an eye on financial aid many of those years. And so that was a different bucket. So there are institutional priorities. At the same time, I think colleges are really trying to lean in to not have specific, ideas of what the institutional priorities may be from year to year. I mean, they change. I mean, look at the conversation right now. I mean, there's a huge Supreme Court conversation right now about race and admissions. The conversation about legacy and admissions I find really interesting right now because a lot of colleges are dropping it, some are not. All of these conversations are really dynamic. I find it very interesting to kind of watch what's happening because I do think that colleges are trying, in my opinion, they are trying to do their best. They are trying to create dynamic classes of people who will learn from each other. They are trying to give everyone a shot and create communities within their college campuses. And it's a difficult thing to do. And so I think these conversations that are happening are really interesting. I think there are absolutely institutional priorities. I think they change from year to year. One of the things I tell families when, they get so hyper-focused on this is that that's out of your control.
Right.
It's out of your control. And so again, focusing on, I am a white girl from New Jersey who went to a public school. What does that mean for me? I mean, it's out of your control. So again, what is in your control? Well, what is in control is how do I tell the application committee that I absolutely love volunteering at the soup kitchen? There's a lot of noise out there, Debbie, and all of you out there. There's a lot of noise out there. And I think it's important to be involved in those conversations. I think it's important to create positive change. I think it's important to speak up when you have an opinion. However, when it comes to the actual application and sitting down and filling out that application, what's in your control is in your control. What's out of your control is out of your control. And so I think focus on what's in your control, how you can authenticate and go from there.
So there's actually a few questions. Oh, and this relates to the what's in your control, comment. And one person said, basically you have so little, characters to really describe yourself, or just the student has to describe themselves. So I'd be curious and you mentioned a few examples in the book, some things that stood out to you, when you were looking at applications that that did help make that student's case or made their story come together. That's one thing. And the second thing is somebody's asking, and I've seen this change as well, is the kind of that admissions used to kind of harp on, we want this well-rounded student, who's, good at a lot of different things. And now it's more like, show us the thing that's really that you're most interested in. And what's your point? What's your pointiness?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. That's a question I get all the time. Is it better to be well-rounded or really good at something? And my answer is, it depends on who you are. I mean, neither should be forced. I mean, frankly, if you're asking that question because you want to go sign up to take Latin lessons for the next 12 years to stand out in Latin, that's a waste of your time. And if you're trying to be well-rounded by checking as many boxes, that's a waste of your time. Anything that's forced is a waste of your time. And so to be more kind of specific about, what stands out in applications. So what always surprised me is that when I would read applications, supplements, for example, a lot of colleges will require supplements. And so Dartmouth, for example, was on the common application. So what that was if you don't know about the common application, it's one application you can use to fill out that goes to many different schools. And often schools like Dartmouth will ask you for a supplement to the common application. And sometimes it'll say, why do you want to come to Dartmouth, right? Some schools will ask you kind of wackadoodle questions just to ask you those questions. Some of them, Dartmouth had something called a peer recommendation, which meant we'd ask you to submit a peer recommendation. Other places have parent recommendations. Like, there's a lot going on in the supplement. And for me, I would always be so confused when students would apply to Dartmouth and either not fill out the supplement or not do a very thorough job with the supplement. I mean, for me, I tell students, you know, back to the lawyer and the evidence thing, you want to put forward your most thorough application. And so, for example, so many students are hyper focused on the essay.
Mm-hmm.
They want to write
the common personal statement essay.
The common personal statement. They want to write the great American college essay, right? And they focus on it. They spend months on it. Fine. Essays are important. I will absolutely say you should absolutely, you know, spend some time on your personal statement, you know, edit, etc. However, there were so many times I would read this beautifully written personal statement. And then I would get to the supplemental question that was, you know, why do you want to come to Dartmouth? And it would be 2 sloppy generic sentences. And it would make me want to pull my hair out because I want to say, you're spending so much time on this essay. And yet here's another opportunity for you to say, hey, I want to come to Dartmouth because I know X, Y, or Z about the engineering program that is exciting to me because of reason X, Y, or Z. Like, it's a chance for you to be specific, give an example, show something about yourself. The resume, for example, right? And filling out these applications online is not fun. Like, it's techie and you got to get your stuff. But, you know, I see students that will, you know, say, I'm the president of, you know, PLKO. And we'll be like, what is PLKO? I have no idea what that, you know, like,
right.
Just being as thorough as possible. And I use this example in the book, and it's kind of a silly example, but I think it gets the point across. There was one year we had an applicant who their application was very strong and standing out in the pool for many reasons. And yet his email address was something like, you know, lazyguyatthemall@gmail. And we all looked at each other and we're like, how can we admit this kid if he's self-identifying with, you know, lazyguyatthemall@gmail as his whatever? And so I use the example that even, and this sounds extreme and silly, I know, but even using, you know, I love mechanics@gmail.com tells us something about you on your college application. All these things add up. And when you have a lawyer, here I am, and, you know, here's your papers, and you're giving me your papers. I'm your lawyer. I'm trying to make a case for you to go to the dean and say, here is why we want to admit Debbie Schwartz, right? And so if there's a way for you to be more specific with your supplement, if there's a way to tell us more on your resume page about what specifically you do as president of National Honor Society, like, I think about that. You know, I was president of National Honor Society. I've already mentioned that. I thought that was it. Big deal. You know, I put that in. And looking back on it, I wish I would have written more about, you know, like, I raised $10,000 so that we could go on our Virginia Beach trip because, frankly, we saw so many presidents of National Honor Society. We have no idea if that's, you know, if they're really doing much or if it's just, you know, just checking that box. And so I think proving to your lawyer that you have things that are impactful can be helpful. And, you know, not inauthentically. Like, you don't have to go do something crazy to make a statement. You just have to say, hey, I'm treasurer of National Honor Society, and I just want to write in the little box, I've, you know, helped keep track of more money than our school has seen and blah, 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 right?
Right.
That kind of stuff.
Okay. Sorry, Becky, I'm going to continue to remind you to just, like, talk a little bit closer into the mic.
Okay, I feel like, okay, hold on. I'm going real close. Okay.
Okay, good. So along these lines, and just a little bit, I guess, to amuse people, and you actually say it in the book, and I don't know if this is still valid, because you know, you haven't been in the admissions office for a few years, but you said you spent 12 minutes reviewing an application. So again, I'm kind of going along this, like, you know, case or lawyer kind of idea, and just to even just show people, I mean, you want to try and find the best in the application, but you also are time constrained.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you don't realize how many, I mean, 20,000 applications in a year or in a cycle is a lot. And so I read about 150, I think, a week. And so you're moving and you have to move. And so it is a time constraint. And that's why, again, being helpful in your application and making it clear and concise and, not making us try to guess what PKOLD stands for is helpful.
And I have heard that honestly from other people who, manage admissions in terms of the supplements. Kids spend a lot of time on that main essay. You think, okay, it's 650 words, it's going to mean something. It does mean something, but I've heard them say that actually the supplements sometimes mean more because it shows the attention to detail, whether they've spent the time to really think about whatever those supplemental questions are. And quite honestly, they're harder. They are usually 200, 250 words. So it is a harder task to write that type of an essay and get across what you want to get across. So if somebody spends the time to do that, it usually shows in their overall application.
Yeah, and we used to tell people we did not ask for the supplements for our own sake, right? We didn't want to read more materials. We already had 12 minutes to read an application, right? So, and they didn't time, we didn't, they didn't say you only have 12 minutes, but for me, I had to move. And so supplements, we're doing that to give you an opportunity to prove to us that you will go through the steps of doing extra work and showing us extra evidence so that we know you're serious about our college.
Yeah. And so truth be told, and I don't say this often, I actually went to Dartmouth as an undergrad, so I have a little affinity to Becky and the school that she was representing. And I did alumni interviewing, and you can talk about whether or not that plays into any decisions or not. But the one thing as an interviewer, I would always ask somebody is or I would actually pick up, and this is only people maybe who go to Dartmouth, but Dartmouth is called Dartmouth College. It's not called Dartmouth University. And when students would refer to I want to go to a university, I would immediately know you didn't do your homework.
Right.
And I think that's what the supplements show.
Right. Absolutely.
So there was a question about SATs or test scores, kind of like, and again, a test optional started after you left, but even when you were there, kind of how much did test scores play into the decision of looking at students' applications? And do you have any sense of or give us an opinion of what you think is happening with test optional now?
Yeah, so obviously test optional, the pandemic, it changes everything, right? And so test optional, there was an interesting article in Forbes just a couple days ago about what they think test optional is doing. I think it'll take us a couple of years to really see the impact of how many schools went test optional and what will come out of that. However, for me, there's so much conversation around testing. And yet for me, testing was actually not as, exciting as one would think. And what I mean by that is I talked before about a self-selecting pool. And so students who, are already in that 20,000 applicants, they're a self-selecting group. And from my experience, U.S. News and World Report out there will print what our average testing is, right? They'll say, average testing at Dartmouth is a 1450 or average testing at Colby is a 1210 or whatever it is, right? And so students look to those guides to see what the average testing is, and then they often make decisions about their chances of getting in based on those testing results. And so, of course, that kind of creates this self-selecting group. Now, of course, there's pressure to raise those SATs or raise those ACT averages from year to year. I mean, it's obnoxious. It's insane. If I could change it, I would get rid of all those rankings in U.S. News and World Report, because what does it matter if we're admitting 3% or 2%? It's all insanity. But for the person who's trying to navigate the testing here, I tell students, take the tests, do your best, right? Prep as much as possible. And that doesn't mean you have to go hire a tutor, but get the SAT book and do your best, from the local library, and do your best. I'm going to move this here a little bit. And then, once those scores come back, talk to a trusted counselor if you have one at your school. And, in that Forbes article, I think it was saying that, 60, I don't remember, but they were basically saying a huge chunk of people are choosing not to send their test scores, right? And people are looking at those U.S. News and World Report numbers and basically making that decision based on where their testing is falling. So if Dartmouth has a 1410 average and I got a 1310, a lot of students are not going to submit those scores. Vice versa, if I have a 1510, they're going to submit those scores. So what's happening, and I remember years before the pandemic, there were a couple schools that went test optional, and their average testing raised because of the natural phenomenon we just talked about. And so their scores got higher in US News and World Report. And so for the average person trying to go through this, I say take the tests, do your best, get those scores, talk to a counselor. And if those scores are within a range that's higher than the average, send them. If they're much lower than the average, consider maybe not sending them. However, what I say is more important is that no matter what your testing is, your transcript needs to have the goods. And so, and again, this is a kind of obnoxious extreme example, but there were students at Dartmouth who would apply with a perfect 1600, and yet their transcript wouldn't match that score, meaning, they'd have, or their recommendations, frankly, they'd have an English teacher that said, it comes naturally to Johnny. And if he got an 800 on his verbal SAT and his English teacher says, it comes naturally to Johnny, that's not a kid we're interested in, right? There are plenty of other high achieving kids who have the goods in terms of recommendations from both counselors and teachers and the actual transcript. And, I would tell students again, if you get a really high SAT score, we're going to expect that your grades are good. And so, the day-to-day, again, what's in your control? You have control of your day-to-day academic activity, right? Going to class, showing up for class, developing relationships with your teachers. I get lots of questions about, is it better to go to this school or that school for my odds? Like, what are my odds if I spend the money to go to this school, or if I choose to go to that school, or if I remember? People are trying to game the system left, right, and center. And at the end of the day, I'm like, go to whatever school fits you best, right? What's going to make you the best student for learning's sake and for your own individual sake. And then, do your best in the classroom. And that transcript, if we have a kid who has really good grades and the recommendations really go to bat for that particular student, for their intellectual curiosity, et cetera, that's good. And they have, SAT scores that are not way below the average range. Like, that's a kid that we're more excited about than the kid with the perfect SAT scores whose grades and the recommendations aren't living up to it. And so transcript to me and recommendations are really important. Having said that, I'm just going to keep talking, Debbie, because there's it's
a lot in your head.
It's a lot. But, I would have kids say to me, curriculum, like questions about curriculum. How many APs should I take? Is it better if I take this or this? What about class rank? What about, honors classes? Should I be taking Saturday classes? Craziness, right? All of these questions that are the same questions I had in 1997. They're good questions. And yet I think we're all caught up on, there is a way to do this, when in reality, the point is you should be challenging yourself with the most appropriate curriculum to prepare you for whatever's next. And so, taking eight AP classes for the sake of taking 8 AP classes, and frankly, maybe your GPA tanks because you're overdoing it, maybe isn't the best idea, right? At the same time, floating through in, like, my high school had something called an unweighted rank, which meant, you probably all know what that means, but basically the rank, you could be valedictorian of the class taking like classes that were basically not honors, not APs, but because it was unweighted, you could be top of your class. Not that I'm bitter about this, 25 years later. But as admissions counselors, we're doing holistic admissions, and I can't believe I haven't used that word yet, but it's holistic admissions where we read through everything. And so, we would look at, hey, here is your transcript. We would get something called the high school profile, which, here's a hint: if you have not gotten a copy of your high school profile, get one.
So important. We actually we tell it a lot, but people don't. And I feel bad when people say, "Oh, what is this high school profile? I don't even know anything about it." You should know about it. And Becky, go ahead and explain to people what it is and then how you use it in admissions.
Right, and most people don't know about it. I didn't know about it. Most people don't know. So it is a document created by usually your guidance or college counseling office. And it is usually 1 page or 2 page, and it is a document that tells us all we need to know about your high school. So it will tell us what, is it public or private? What courses are offered? It will tell us sometimes, like, what percentage go to college, right? Is it a school that sends 99% to 4-year colleges? Do 23% to go to 4-year colleges? And there's no structure, there's no requirements. So all high school profiles are different. Some of them, will be 5-page glossy brochures of all of the fancy schools that all of their graduates go to. Some of them are very bare bones and give us very minimal information. However, we use them as a map key to understanding your transcript. So we put them side by side and we say, okay, here's Debbie's transcript and here's Debbie's high school profile. What is she doing with the opportunities available to her? And so in my example with an unweighted rank, we might see, Debbie is ranked number 23 out of 100 at her school, but she's taking a more difficult curriculum because it's an unweighted rank, because look at all these classes that she's taking that are on the high school profile that are the hardest in that group, right? Some high school profiles, they can be helpful because they can tell us things like, students are capped. They can only take 4 AP classes. Or, some of them will say, hey, AP German stops at level 3. I mean, we get all sorts of crazy things in these high school profiles, but they're helpful because you can imagine, like, my job was to read all of the New Jersey applications. And yet there are so many New Jersey high schools. They are so different. I don't know them all. And so I had to get to know these schools by reading the high school profile. And the reason I think it's important that applicants get them is because you should read your high school profile and then tell the admissions officer anything they need to know that's not already being told.
That's a great suggestion. So families should get a copy of the school's high school profile, and most schools do have it on their website. But if they don't, it's very valid to call up the school counselor and just say, direct me to where I can get a copy of it. It's not secret. And that's a great idea. They should look at that and then look at their own transcript or look at what they've done in high school and kind of, I'm assuming you'll go kind of just explain discrepancies or explain what the high school profile doesn't highlight.
Absolutely. And that's a lot of them you can get right online. I sometimes used to find them online, but yeah. And so for example, if you're at a high school that is not telling someone that I couldn't take a language my senior year because we were all required to take PE and it was only offered during block 2 or block 3, whatever is keeping you up at night. There's a section on the application called additional information. Usually it was blank. I would say 95% of the time it was blank because people don't know what to do with it. They don't want to overshare. And yet that's a great opportunity for whatever's waking you up at night, right? To just, there's no such thing as too much information. And so that's a great opportunity to say, hey, I want to let you know that, my B- in honors physics was the lowest grade I've ever gotten in my life. And yet the most fun to be challenged, and whatever you're worried about, like, tell your lawyer, tell your person. And I think when it comes to transcripts and making choices and SATs, I mean, you can go bananas thinking or trying to figure out what a college wants. And at the end of the day, all these high schools are so different. Students are getting so many different opportunities. There is no way to say this is what we want because everybody has different opportunities. And so again, what's in your control? Get a copy of your high school profile, take classes that are challenging yet appropriate for you, learn something. Don't get senioritis, which is when you are admitted to a school and then you just stop working, your senior year. Senior year grades are really important. Fall term senior year grades are really important. And then the recommendation piece, which I know I'm going a million miles an hour, but I'm just keeping track of time. The recommendation piece really is, the perfect puzzle piece to that transcript and that high school profile, because after we look at your transcript, I mean, frankly, a lot of kids have good grades in the pool. And so recommendations can help share anecdotes and intangible information to make that application kind of come alive and let us see, like, not only your straight academic numbers, but the intellectual curiosity. Most colleges and universities usually require 1 counselor recommendation and 2 teacher recommendations. Right. Counselor recommendations can be a little tricky because I hear from a lot of families that they don't know their counselor. Their counselor is counseling 1,000 people. That's okay. I think we saw lots of students from schools where counseling varies very much out there.
Right.
And so, if you don't know your counselor very well, I would say go meet your counselor, introduce yourself, sit down, hand them a list and say, here's why I want to go to Duke. Like, help them, because they are going to have to write a letter. So help them write their letter. However, the teacher recommendations, if you didn't know your teachers, not good, right?
Right.
Because we expected that at least, 2 teachers out there would have some kind of commentary on you. And, I used to tell people we wouldn't hold it against your teachers if they misspelled words, if their letters were brief. Some of the best teacher recommendations I read were just brief, commentary on a particular student in a way that was something that we weren't already seeing. And so, I use that janitor recommendation, but I think it's a great kind of example of, a great teacher recommendation could say, hey, Debbie is the only student I want to sit next to on the bus during a school.
And that says a lot. That says a ton.
That's all you need, right? That's all you need, right? And so, and again, there's a lot of pressure, you can't control what your teacher is going to write. So that's out of your control. But you can control that you can ask your teacher well in advance so that they have plenty of time. Stop by office hours and tell them, hey, Mrs. So-and-so, I'm applying early decision to Williams because I really love their theater department and they have a help them write these letters, because these poor teachers have to sit and write all these letters. And my brother-in-law writes a ton of these. He's a history teacher. And he'll say to me, the best letters are the ones that the students kind of help me realize, why do you want to go to this school? Because if I'm just writing all these letters, try to help them. Again, law, evidence, help them help you.
What about somebody's asking a letter of recommendation from a coach rather than a teacher?
Yeah, so most schools will require teacher recs, but you can send additional letters of recommendation. That custodian letter was an additional letter. We always used to say, use your judgment when it came to additional letters. 1 or 2 are fine, but if you're sending 6 or 7, you just, it smells like desperation, really.
Right.
And I laugh when I say it, because we would see letters from people that it was clear they didn't have relationships from people.
Right.
However, coaches, clergy members, mentors, all of that is certainly welcome if they can help shed a different angle on your candidacy.
And what about, someone's also asking about the recency of does it have to be a teacher that they just had in 11th grade, or can it be from an earlier year in high school?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say, as a grain of, or as a side note, some schools have specific requirements. So always check with whatever school. And there are some schools that will say, we want, a junior math recommendation if it's a specialty, engineering school or whatever. Where we were at Dartmouth, we did not care. We did not specify. It could be a first year or sophomore teacher. However, most recommendations were written by junior teachers or sophomore teachers. And I think that's because they were more recent, right? Your relationship was more recent. But frankly, if a first year science teacher could say more to us, or there was something that happened in his class, I mean, we were fine with it. We didn't really care, and we weren't keeping track. Again, we're trying to move through these applications. We're just looking, we're not looking for what date did you have this person in class, but we were looking for, what can you tell me about this kid that can kind of, shed some light on something just beside his grade.
Right. And actually, we talked about this before we got on. What I love about all the things that you're saying are there are skills that students can learn during the admissions process, but they are skills that they should have for the rest of their life. This idea of getting to know, your teacher. Well, ultimately, you want to get to know your boss. You know what I mean? These are skills that they're starting to learn, but then will be valuable for a lifetime.
Absolutely. I mean, I talk about that with interviews.
I mean, I'm sorry, like making your case, like the application is somewhat like making your case in this, situation. But again, in a work environment, you're going to have to make your case for your ideas. So it all translates.
Yeah. And with the making your case, I mean, again, what I hope for families, having been there, again, I wrote this book because I was there and because I did not get into my dream school. And then I worked at my dream school, denying 90% of these incredible young people. And, I just felt like if you learn for the sake of learning, you go to high school for the sake of high school, not focusing on college as the end, because college is not the end. As we all know, college is not the end. College, this is a lifelong journey, right? And again, what's out of your control? There's a lot out of your control. But what is in control is the here and now. Like if you're a junior and you're trying to pick classes for the fall, which I'm sure you already have because half of you are probably in school already, but, deciding whether or not you want to take AP Bio or, honors anatomy, if you're really interested in anatomy, take honors anatomy and have your counselor comment on, your real interest in dissecting, whatever. It doesn't have to be for a school, because what happens if you set yourself, like I did, I was doing things for a school. And when that school rejected me, I felt like I was not worthy. Instead of saying, I am going to do things so regardless of where I go, I have the foundation to succeed. And I think that's healthier. I think that's more palatable. I think that's more doable. Again, with prescriptive advice, like here are ways to make your application stronger, not better. I don't like the words better, but stronger means you're giving me more evidence so that I can make my case, because you filled out the why do I want to go to Duke by using a specific thing that wasn't just, oh, they have great professors, where everyone and their mother is writing the same thing. And so, in filling out the supplemental essays, I mentioned for a second interviews the other day, and again, with the pandemic, this is all changing. But to your point, Debbie, like the interview, people would get obsessed with the interview, so nervous about the interview. And for lots of young people, this is their first interview.
Yes.
And yet you're going to have interviews the rest of your life.
Right.
And it's a great example for us, and the interview, again, with the pandemic, things are changing rapidly. But for us, we would say to folks, most interview write-ups are good. Most people like the people they're interviewing. Very rare that people are like, don't admit this person, right? Most of them are almost unhelpful because they're so positive and everything else is so positive. So take back control and say, hey, I'm going to, Debbie Schwartz went to Dartmouth. She's going to interview me, but I want to ask her questions because when I graduate, I want to move to, Atlanta, and she lives here now. And how am I going to get a job, right? How do you take back control so that you can connect with someone, particularly if the interview is for a school far away? It's only one person's experience, but pepper them with questions and try to make this more about you and less about what the college wants.
And so I love also the analogy in my head, as you said it, and I've thought about it before. It's like a ping pong. It's the control going back and forth. That's not bad. Again, it's just understanding the process. And so I'm emphasizing this because families right now, this is the summer, deadlines haven't really happened yet for admissions. Students are still kind of finalizing where they're going to apply. They're finalizing their essays. You have the ping pong is in your court, or the tennis ball's in your court, you've got the control now to make the decisions about where to apply, to make the decisions about how good or how strong your application is going to be by pulling in the pieces of the puzzle for an admissions officer. And then, when you hit submit, kind of the ping pong goes to the college a little bit, but then it comes back to the student and the family, because hopefully the student will be admitted to several colleges and they'll have to make a decision. So that it is like this back and forth. And so understand where you are in the process and what you can influence. I'm just summarizing exactly what you emphasized, and make the most of it, while the ball is in your court.
Yeah. It's funny when I wrote this book, I've said this 10 times, but I have 2 kids of my own now. They're 4 and 5. And my husband said to me, he said, Becky, you talked the talk. Now you have to walk the walk.
With your own kids.
With my own kids, right? It's little. I have one that's going in 1st grade, but I already feel it. I already feel the well, what elementary school is your kid going to go to? And is he going to play soccer? Or is he going to wrestle? And what about gymnastics? It's all, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is real. And we all feel it. And you can probably see my husband, we bought these kindness, be a nice human, and curiosity. And it's just a reminder for me, because again, I'm a parent now and I'm going to be going through this. And it's very easy to get sucked up into it. And yet, at the end of the day, I think, a couple of things. At the end of the day, number one, the world is changing rapidly, and I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the coming years with these crazy admissions rates, right? 2%, 3%, 4%. Where is this getting us? And I would hope that students are hearing messages like mine, like there are lots of opportunities out there. There are lots of paths. How do we make the most of the here and the now and take that forward, right? Because we all hear, I did this program for a group in California, and they were talking about, all the, the Stanford dropouts who start their internet companies. And yeah, like this, but this happens, everyone has their own way. And yet high school should matter for high school. And you will get into college. You will probably get into multiple colleges. You might get into your number one dream school. And yet, even setting that up as the dream school, like I learned this firsthand. Dartmouth was my only, that was it. I was going to Dartmouth. I had the sweatshirt. I was telling people I was going to Dartmouth. And yet Colby College was my dream school. And that's where I ended up going. And so the narrative changes, everything changes. And I think for high school students, there's so much pressure. But take back control, do your best, be authentic. Be thoughtful.
I love that. Yeah.
Be thoughtful, because the authentic kid who is thorough is much better than any inauthentic cheater, frankly, who is going to just, be.
Or it doesn't have to be a cheater, just inauthentic because they're doing it because they think that's what they should be doing, but it's not. Right. It's not activities. It's not topics that they're really interested in. Right.
And people have pushed me, and you do want to challenge yourself, like you do, but to your point, Debbie, this is practice for the real world. In college, like we used to joke, hey, if you get into Dartmouth, you're going to show up here. It's not easy, right? You have to be prepared both academically and socially, and physically. And these winters are nothing to joke at, So how do you best prepare yourself for the world wherever it leads? And there are little things you can do, and but I think just trying to take a step back, take a deep breath, and say, this is in my control, that's out of my control. Here are the boundaries, and let's just focus on this.
So it is 12:57. I'm going to be respectful of Becky's time and everybody's time here because it is lunchtime or midday, wherever you are, or early if you're watching from the West Coast. So thank you so much, Becky. This was so informative. And somebody wrote, they watched a lot of webinars, but this was the best one that they've ever watched. And somebody even said, maybe we can talk. Can Becky come back for part 2 and part 3? So.
I will tell you, I'm so sorry about the audio. And so if I come back, I will have my earpods and my husband here because I'm always going to blame him for my tech. But I apologize for the audio, and I thank you guys. This is not easy. And Debbie Schwartz in Road to College, you're in good hands with her. So thank you.
Thank you. And so again, we did mention it was a little too much for me to manage to pick 10 people out while we're on, but we will pick the 10 people. We will put it in the email. We will contact you separately. Those people from the generosity of Becky's publisher are going to get a copy of the paperback. But if you're not one of those 10 people, I am telling you, please check out the hardcover, the paperback. It's such valuable information. I told Becky before we got on, I quoted a lot of the things that she said in this book. And it's not, no offense, it's not earth shattering, but you frame it in such a great way that it's easy for people, for families and students to really understand how they should, manage this process, how they should manage high school, what's important, and, and what not to get crazy about it, So
it's back to common sense. That's what I tell. Just back to common sense. It drowns out the crazy, hopefully.
Yes. And one last thing, just for everybody who asked, I really hope you show this to your student. And I know that they might not have been here today. You will get a link to the recording, tomorrow. So please sit down with your student, watch it, and feel free to send me questions afterwards. Maybe, Becky, we'll summarize maybe 1 or 2 important questions that if we get a lot, but this is a dialogue, so, please, send questions, and it also helps us to understand what people need more information about. So thank you, Becky. I love talking to you. It was so much fun. I really appreciate you taking the time during the day, and we'll squeeze in another part 2 or part 3, and we'll make sure that your your mic is a little better. But I know people could still hear, even though it wasn't perfect, but it was such valuable information. So thank you.
Thank you, Debbie.
Okay. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.